A few weeks ago, I transplanted a bunch of eggplant out into the backyard garden. And over the last few weeks, I've noticed a good number of flea beetles hanging out on the leaves, so it can make the leaves look like they have a bunch of little shot holes punched into them. But the other day, I was inspecting a bunch of eggplants, and I found no flea beetles. But I did find a small metallic green fly hanging out on the leaves. So today I want to talk about the long-legged or long-legged fly. Now, I have seen this fly for many years and have never thought much of anything about it. Other than that, it's just probably a fly. But as you can see, as drawn out on this whiteboard, these flies are so much more than that. But hardly any people have really talked about them, so I really kind of want to take this time to really kind of dive deep into this particular type of fly because it is so beneficial to the landscapes, to the gardens. These specific flies are kind of indirectly especially beneficial for humans. So in terms of the habitat, where can you find the long-legged fly? So it seems that these flies seem to enjoy being in the sun, like basking in the sun, but having maybe some shady areas nearby. These guys will hang out on plant leaves and are very active, right? It's like they're actively guarding these plants from insect pests, which I think is really cool. And so they'll be on plant leaves, especially like larger leaved plants, like I've seen them on plantain, rhubarb, sunchokes, eggplants, peppers, and some of these plants, like the eggplant, at least where I'm at, will actively be a host for certain insects like flea beetles, which are a food source for the long-legged fly, right? And so that will actually act as an attractant for these beneficial insects. With a good plant diversity, we can get more of these long-legged flies because these long-legged flies will also feed on some pollen, right? Some nectar to be able to get their carbohydrates, right? Their quick energy source. So if we have more different types of flowering plants on the landscape, that can be like a supplemental food source for these beneficial flies. And then of course, what is going to draw in these long-legged flies is going to be the pest insects, right? If you don't have the pest insects, you're not going to have that prime food source for the long-legged flies, and you won't have the long-legged flies. So the pest insects are kind of important so that we can have this balance between the beneficial and the pest insects. And then we also want to have overwintering areas available for these long-legged flies to be able to hatch and develop as larvae over the winter and into the springtime, right? So that may involve maybe not tilling certain areas of the garden or the landscape, the agricultural field, whatever the terrain may be, and providing that habitat for these insects to kind of grow and thrive and to be able to hatch and grow into adults that can really benefit our gardens, right? And having like dampness nearby, like maybe there's some water body, not too far away, like a pond or a stream, or even just like a wooded area, right? Where we might have some more shadier, damper conditions that might be a good, suitable habitat for these flies to survive in, right? So these flies are super beneficial, as I've said, right? They go after so many different insects. I can read down the list. It's pretty extensive, and this list may very well, and in fact is probably not exhaustive, right? But to give you a general idea, they go after flea beetles, aphids, thrips, mites, springtails, whiteflies, termites, gnats, bark beetles, mosquitoes, leafhoppers, silverfish, and some types of caterpillars, especially these smaller ones. And then of course we have some different types of flower nectar that these flies will also sustain themselves off of to compensate for all that protein and fat in these insects, but they're also getting the carbohydrates from that flower nectar. And then of course, as a final note and as a general rule, when we're talking about beneficial insects, we really do not want to be applying insecticides. And I'm specifically talking about the synthetic ones, the neonicotinoids, and all the others that are going to affect an insect's nervous system. Because a lot of these insecticides do not discriminate against what type of insect they negatively affect, right? It generally ends up being more of a broad spectrum. And so they take away the pest insects, but they also take away the beneficial insects, either directly by targeting the beneficial insect's nervous system as well, and or indirectly by taking away the beneficial insect's food source. So it is super important to let the ecosystem do its thing, if at all possible, and to use minimal intervention as much as possible. And intervention being like the application of synthetic insecticides. Even some of these more natural insecticides, some of those don't necessarily discriminate either, and can have negative effects on our beneficial insect populations. There's an element of patience that needs to be involved, right? And trust in the ecosystem, in the landscape, that it will do its part, right? As long as you have set that landscape up ahead of time for success, it should pay itself back sooner rather than later. Right, so we want to make sure we have that environment. We have that damp wooded area, or a water access point for these insects. We want to have a little bit of shade, right? But we also want to have the sunny areas and some of the larger leaf plants, and then also a diversity of flowering plants as well. And then we also need to have some of the pest insects. Then the beneficial insects will follow. They will come in, they will make themselves at home, because this is a habitat that supports their livelihood and their lives. So minimizing tillage or not tilling in certain areas, along with not applying a lot of these different insecticides, especially the ones that are like broad spectrum and that will target a lot of the flies, or the fly larvae, are also very important in order to foster the growth, well-being of these beneficial insects, so that they can play their part in the landscape and in the garden, and so that we don't have to worry so much about all these different pests that are out there. We've got to help to facilitate the balance of the landscape. So thank you so much for checking out this video on the long-legged fly. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you can now kind of appreciate a little bit more of what these insects are and how beneficial they can be to the landscape. So thank you again so much for checking out this video. I appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Take care.